Hey, we are back once again with episode 4. Already 4 episodes?
It's amazing.
Time
I love
moves
it.
by
Right.
very, very fast. And this time, we don't have donuts.
Right.
No donuts this time.
I
I'm
know.
trying to cut back on the sugar a little bit.
I know. I was thinking about that. Why? What's the reason? But the reason was we didn't want sugar.
Yeah, too much sugar.
Right.
Yeah. Especially because yesterday I ate a lot of just raw chocolate chips.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we're paying for your sins.
We are paying for my sins. They were so good. I go in a season of eating like so many chocolate chips or making my own trail mix, and then I kind of dial it all the way back
Yes.
to nothing again, and then it will spike back up once again. But for right now, no more sugar.
Right.
No more sugar. I don't want to get sick.
I was so good yesterday. I thought maybe a donut was in store for me today.
Well, you
but
should have
that's
said
okay.
something.
No.
I would have made a sacrifice.
No, then I can have 2 days in a row of really being good.
Oh, well, that's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
That's a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should probably get started because we got some probably easier to follow topics than we did last week.
Right.
Because we went really in the weeds last week.
Yep.
I think it was really good content. But we got ones that are a little bit more super hard hitting and probably a lot easier to follow this time.
Yeah, I think this one also gets into some pain.
Oh, pain for me and the client.
Right. But pain for the client when they don't do it right.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the first name we're going to be focusing on here, the first hard knock is not owning your marketing assets. And the best way to describe what we really mean by assets is, I mean, we're both storytellers.
Right.
So I figure we should tell some stories just to give a little bit of a broad picture of exactly what do we mean by marketing assets here. Okay. So I'm going to take you back to a day far, far, far in the past. By far in the past, I mean like 5 years ago.
Okay. Right.
Not like 15 or 100 or 1,000 like in my D&D stories, but
Like
like
I
5
could.
years.
I have longer.
Maybe we should have had you start then.
Exactly.
So if we go a little bit into the past,
Yes.
we had just started working with Stark Industries.
Yes.
Blue skies, really excited to work together. And my upbringing in marketing, a lot of it, besides like game design, gained my start there. I did a lot of web performance. And so a lot of the things that I was looking at in that relationship was, okay, well, how's their website look? And how good it fits the website, right? Because I worked a bunch of like on Google Chrome and figuring out, okay, how we can really eke out the performance, make it a great experience. Because it was not a great experience. They had like 5 different types of frameworks running on that thing.
Right.
It made your phone hot loading it, which is not a good sign, by the way. You do not want your phone to run hot when you load a website.
Right.
So that was not a good sign, right?
Yeah.
Maybe in the winter.
Right.
But the main problem we found out, they didn't own their website. They had no ownership at all.
Yeah. What's that mean though? That they didn't own it.
They had no source code.
Okay.
And what I mean by source code is on a website, for those of you who don't really know how websites work, probably a good idea to get a little familiar after this.
Let's take a minute and tell us.
Yeah, but for the most part, there are, you can say 3 parts of a website. If I'm keeping it super dumbed down, you have like the HTML code.
Right.
You have the JavaScript, which is kind of like the scripting language to make, when you click a button, something happens. Right. And then you have all the imagery. All right. They owned none of that. And what I mean by that is generally in programming, one very simple trick a lot of people use to make websites load faster, right? Because I have to download a big file from the cloud, right? And so the best way to do that is to compress all that data together. So like think about a zip file, right? We all use zip files to make it smaller.
Okay.
My phone can download it faster. If I'm on a subway, I can get that content more quickly.
Okay. So I shrink it.
You shrink it, exactly. Right. Yeah. Now, what happens when you shrink it is you have no idea what it said before. Because common names like header or call to action might get replaced in things like JavaScript, right?
Okay.
By like A, B, and C, but I have no idea what that even means.
Yeah.
I have no idea. And so we ran into the problem where, well, since the previous agency they worked with just gave them, hey, here are the extremely processed files, right? The encrypted version of the files.
Right.
That's what they owned. And so to make any changes was absolute hell on earth.
I remember.
Oh,
We had a
yeah.
contractor that was doing that for us.
Oh, well, and that was part of that company beforehand.
Yes.
And his process for years was going in, doing a control F search on a string, like a line of text he found on the website.
Yes.
So he could find out where something else was and figure out what the variable names were. So to make a really quick change, like to change the name of a button, took him like sometimes half an hour.
Right.
That's not okay. And it meant that they couldn't make little updates to their website either. Like if you want to add a new section or a new call to action,
I remember that.
was not in the cards.
Yeah. See, I think I have put all of this stuff out of my mind because it was a hard moment, and
Don't worry, I couldn't.
it didn't make a lot of sense to me of why a company would allow this. But we're going to get into that a little bit more.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Well, I can tell you one reason why a lot of agencies do this. And by the way, in this episode, we're definitely throwing a lot of shade.
Right.
For those of you who love that stuff, this is your type of episode. And a lot of the reasons agencies do that is because they want to lock them in.
Correct.
As much as possible to
Right.
make it as painful as possible to leave.
I get that.
Because they don't trust that their own value proposition is strong enough to keep a customer around.
Yeah.
Until they find everywhere they can to make it the Roach Motel.
Oh, I've got my own examples of this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's what happened there. And how we ended up solving that problem was they were too down deep in the hole.
Right. But we did go to that company and we looked for those files and we asked them for those files.
Oh, they were gone.
And they were gone.
They were gone.
Right.
Yeah. Even like the little icons you'll put on a website, those were gone too.
Yeah.
So we had no source files for any of that.
Yeah.
So we started completely from scratch. We built them a brand new website. We gave them GitHub access. For those of you who don't know, that's like the most core source files you could ever possibly look at. So that they could do whatever they wanted. When the time came that we parted ways, they own all of that content.
Right.
They never have to come to us for any of it. They own literally all of it.
It was their own GitHub that we put it on too.
We did.
Right.
We did. They
Yeah.
own literally everything there.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's nothing I could do to take it away from them, even if I wanted to.
Yeah. We're the guys that wear the white hats. In the Western movies, we're the guys that wear the white hats.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's one thing that we think about when we're saying not owning your marketing assets, right? It's owning all of your reports, all of your dashboards, all of the meeting notes that people come to you with, like asking, "Hey, that was a great meeting. Could you add the meeting notes to this shared drive we have?" Right? It is owning your website. Do you have the source files? If you had to leave, could you?
Right.
Right? And a lot of people can't. And I think you had another story of something like this.
Right. So this is true life story. Company called Productivity Point. I mentioned them before. Computer training company back in the early 90s, back when you did instructor-led training, not online. And we had an agency in the Chicago area, very, very well known. In fact, they were the agency that invented Be All You Can Be for the Army.
Oh, cool.
Diamonds are a woman's best friend for De Beers. And so we had them come in and do our work, and it was really wonderful. But there was a time when our franchisees wanted access to those assets. And assets now, I'll extend your definition of those. So these are the logo files. These are the audio files for an ad that we were running, the video files, the things that they had created but we wanted access to. And that got to be a very tense moment because they basically said we own that work product.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah. And so just to be clear, how this whole company was formed was it was a franchisee model. And you're
Correct.
saying there were a bunch of different franchisees that kind of made their own stuff.
Well, part of our deal was to give them yes, they had their own little agencies in their own market, and they wanted to take the global things that we had done and let them run in Poughkeepsie, New York, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to facilitate that, and it just became a really tense moment of who actually owns this. And so, yeah, that became a real issue for us as we started to separate from this ad agency.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah. I mean, speaking of ad agencies, I've worked and seen a lot of different advertising agencies out there where when they do work for you as a company, they don't like build your own Google account, your own Facebook, your own social media. And so if you ever want to leave, you start 100% from scratch.
Right. Well, let's talk about Durendal a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe that would be a good time to talk about that.
Yeah. I mean, Durendal is in the process of being acquired.
Right.
and getting handed off to a different company. And a big part of that is swapping over from the marketing agencies, the advertising platforms that they were using, over to what
The acquired
their
company.
acquire company
Right.
is doing.
Right. That's what they're buying. They're
Right.
buying all those
Well,
assets.
they're buying the process
Right.
and everything too, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they want to
everything.
make sure that once that job is done, that Durendal continues to run just as well, if not better, than
Right.
it was before, right? Because they should have assets to bring new resources now.
Correct.
Right? That's the ideal. And what ended up happening, the more was looked into it, is one, they don't own really the social media accounts. They don't own the keys of the kingdom.
Right.
The website's very confusing. Who even owns that? That's another problem. Not as bad as Stark Industries, thankfully, because
Yes.
it's a WordPress site, so that's much better.
Right.
But their advertising accounts, there was this weird proprietary program that this agency was using. So basically, it was like this big roll-up account of all the other accounts they were doing, and so there's no way to split that up. And basically what that means, without getting into super techie nerdy jargon, is that when they move over to the new agency, right, of the acquirer, they will start at 0 for all their advertising.
Right.
And the reason that's
So
bad...
okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, the reason that's bad is with how a lot of online advertising works,
Good.
like
I'm glad you're getting to that
Facebook,
point.
Google advertising, is that, well, you need a history. They need to know what works and what didn't work.
Google does, for instance.
Google does, right. And so that takes months to build. And so what is going to happen is they're going to have a couple months, if not more, where they just won't get as many leads, and the acquirer is going to be pretty ticked off.
Right.
And that's not good. And there's no way around it, right? You can't get around that problem. It's just all the things that, one, you hope an agency or your contractors and people are thinking ahead, but not everyone does. Because it's generally a lot easier to not.
I think there's probably a lot of thinking that went ahead, and they thought about, we're not going to make it easy for people to leave.
Oh, so the reason they might have made that system is to,
I think it's I've used this term before, the ultimate roach motel. That was an ad that ran a number of years ago that was, you put this box out in your house somewhere, and the roaches would go in, and they could never get back out, and that was the whole idea. It was a roach motel, and they were dead. And I think a lot of organizations do actually think about that. Let's make this really painfully difficult for people to leave us.
Oh, without question.
Yeah.
And I mean, to the point where my good friend Dennis Hu, right? He's had multiple times where a client has approached him to say, hey, by the way, I'd love to do business with you. And when he looked into the different types of agencies and partners that they were part of, he's like, I'm sorry, I cannot take your account. Not because I don't like you, but because I have worked with these people before and they will never give you the assets. And I'm sorry, but I cannot fight that battle for you right now. I just don't have the levity the energy to do so.
Right.
And they lost. I mean, this guy is brilliant. I love him to death. And they weren't able to do business with him because he's like, well, you don't own all this stuff. So if you fix that, maybe.
Right.
But until then, I literally can't. I can't sign up for something where my legs are going to be tied.
Yeah, in Durendal, I think their issue is everything's going great when you have a wonderful agency. They're delivering what for them, it's leads.
Right.
Everything's great. But the unforeseen, unexpected event is that the owner decided to sell the business.
Right.
And so now new owner comes in and says, all right, let's start working on how we're going to transition all of this to us.
Yeah, exactly.
And
then you find out
Then
everything.
you find out, right.
Yeah, which is the last time. You don't want to find out then.
Right.
Right. You don't want to find out when it's too late.
Yeah.
So I think that is a very good example. That's why I wanted to kind of go through 3 different stories.
I think those are good.
Because I wanted to paint a picture for all of you that when we say assets, it's basically almost anything related to marketing. And by the way, sales as well.
Right.
Right? You should own all of your sales material. If someone built a sales process, right, going back to like episode 2, right? If there was a flow chart someone made, you better own that. Right? You don't want a different agency to hold it and all you have is a printout, because if you lose that printout, you're dead.
Well, sales training. A lot of times we pay for an organization to do sales training, and we pay for them to customize all that training for us.
Yep.
But what we actually paid for is not what we think it was delivered. And so when that organization, let's say owner, small contractor, gets hit by a bread truck on the way to work someday,
Yep.
all of a sudden that's gone, right? I don't have access to it. I can't make the edits and the changes and the updates that I need to make.
Yep. Yep. Well, so let's move in a little bit. We've already touched on a lot of this.
Right.
But just to make it really crystal clear, taking out of story mode and moving a little bit over to that application phase.
Sure.
So I want to drive home some things that happen when you don't
Yes.
own your assets, right? And I think that one of the first ones, this is one that you've brought up,
Right.
is when you don't own your assets. Look what just happened to Stark Industries. We had to recreate the entire website.
Yes.
Now, I do believe the website came out far better than it was before. However, it would have been maybe half as cheap for them to make those changes if we didn't have to rewrite the entire thing 100% from scratch.
Well, we were trying to make little edits.
Oh, it was just horrible.
And we couldn't even do that.
No.
So that is what actually forced them to
Make that investment.
make the big investment into a whole overhaul of the website.
Yeah, but I mean,
unnecessary, unfortunately.
it's same for other things that maybe are a little smaller than a website.
Yes.
Right? Like if you made a really great piece of marketing material, sales material, and you don't own the Photoshop files for it.
Right.
Right? Well, think about what happens if 2 years ago a agency built out, or maybe it could even be your employee. Right? It's not just agencies.
Happens all the time.
Your employee might have in their own private Google Drive the
Yes.
Photoshop files. And maybe you have not a great breaking up, right?
Yes.
And maybe it wasn't clean. It happens all the time. You might be the greatest company in the world. It still happens.
Well, we know there's instances where some of our clients, the salesperson has left the organization. All of their sales contacts are on their phone,
Oh, yep.
and it's their personal phone.
Yep.
Or it's on their hard drive and their emails. And when those people go away, if you remember, there's one that they deleted the account and then we didn't have access to it. It was gone, right? So yeah, this hits all phases of business.
But to keep a little bit closer on point here, the first thing that will happen if you don't make sure you own your assets,
Yes.
is that you'll end up recreating them. And so for
You're
those
forced to.
Photoshop files, for example, to close that loop, if your logo changes, or now it's 2025 and you're trying to market yourself slightly differently, but you love the design, but your logo's different now.
Right.
Well, if I have a Photoshop file, that's super quick and easy to just go and do. But if I don't, now I have to go find a designer who's going to go trace all of that back again, swap out the logo, basically recreate it all completely from scratch.
Right.
Because I didn't get the source files.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very true.
And I think the point you were making is kind of going back up to what are assets.
Yes.
And having all of your data for all the different customers you have and the touch points that your sales team has made is also an asset.
Right.
That you need to think about.
Yes.
But let's go into what's another thing that you can think of that happens if you don't own your assets.
Yeah, so we talked about making it more difficult when you sell the business. Right. We talked about that.
Yes.
And then we also talked about, just before we went on the air here, is that we were creating a single point of failure.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So there's all sorts of processes in my business, but now I've just created a single point of failure that now I have to go invest and recreate those assets.
Yeah, well, it's the more people involved in a process to go use whatever it is that your company needs to function.
Right.
Well, now I have like 15 different links to my business, and if any one of them break, I'm dead.
Yes.
And that becomes now a huge emergency.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Like imagine if you didn't own your PowerPoint slides and all of a sudden your CEO is going to a conference to go give a talk, but that employee who made them is now gone.
Yes.
And now you're fumbling around to go make the same presentation. Maybe you're even watching a video that your CEO gave 5 months ago and you're recreating them from the video.
Right. Well, we just, as mentioned this before we went on the air as well, is some of the, it was great that they had everything in a Google Drive. It was wonderful. But then I started looking at who actually owns the assets and the different documents.
And it was a Gmail account.
It was a Gmail account from one of the employees. And I thought, well, what happens when that employee leaves and then just decides to turn off all the access to the things that they own?
Right. Exactly.
Not a great idea.
Oh, no, not a good idea at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the And by the way, if it isn't clear, the main reason why we are building such a big case, right? Another different fact about David, I feel like every single episode we learn a little bit different about my background.
Yes.
Right. As a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer. All right. I loved playing Phoenix Wright. I loved breaking things down procedurally, tons of problem solving until I kind of found out what a lawyer really does, which is read a lot of paperwork.
A lot of paperwork.
A lot of paperwork, right?
Yeah.
But
they're not Perry Mason.
They're not Perry Mason. If it was Perry Mason, I would probably be a lawyer because that's super fun.
Right.
That is super fun.
Yeah.
However, the reason we're taking so much time to build this case is because the solution we're going to get to how to fix it is not fun and it's not easy. And I need to make sure that you are on the edge of your seat thinking, okay, move on because this is uncomfortable. Yeah. So keep grabbing your seat because it's going to keep being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So another thing that can happen, you get vendor locked.
That's true. Right.
Big thing, if you don't know what vendor lock is, this is a term used very commonly in programming especially, probably also in manufacturing.
Sure. Right.
Right? Is AWS, which is Amazon's web services company, for those of you who are not familiar.
Right.
If I'm hosting all my files with them, for example, and they decide, I want to jack up the prices 10x, and I didn't think about that, well, all of a sudden, I don't have any other choice but to pay 10 times the price.
Yes. They put a gun to your head.
Exactly. And if you don't own your assets, imagine if in a terrible turn of events, a salesperson who owns the keys to your kingdom decides to say, hey, by the way, I want you to pay me $1 million by next month because I'm getting offered to go lead with this company and I have all the information on my phone and there's nothing in my contract stating that I have to give you, XYZ files or anything like that at all.
Happens all the time.
Yep. And otherwise, you're going to lose that data. Right. Now, hopefully that doesn't happen. I'm sure maybe that's happened a few times. I like to think the world is not a terrible, terrible place.
Actually, I would think what happens actually is more of people leave, and then a couple months later, you're looking around for something, and you realize that it's gone.
Yeah.
You try to contact that employee. That employee says, hey, I don't even know what you're talking about. I got a new phone, right?
Yeah.
Whatever, and it's gone.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be careful about who you're being left beholden to.
Yes.
And who, by not owning your assets, are you letting actually direct your company?
Yeah.
When they are not really maybe involved in the company at all, or you don't want to be making the decisions.
Yeah.
Happens all the time.
Yeah.
And really, the last thing on our list here is if you don't own the assets and you don't make it a key point to talk with your employee who did the work for you, to make sure that the agency or the contractor you're working with to develop those, reports or those pieces of, handouts used at a conference, right? There tends to be not a lot of accountability on your end, and you tend to kind of just let them go loose.
Right.
And so you lose a little bit of, hey, how did you create it? Making sure that they didn't steal copyright from someone else. I mean, these are all things that we like to believe no one else does.
Yes.
And we like to trust people a lot. And unfortunately, I mean, it is generally pretty healthy to just have a check-in every now and then to make sure, hey, can you just give me some details? Do we own all this, etc.? It will prevent you from getting into a lot of nasty, unforeseen circumstances.
Yeah, I think those are the kind of things that you just need to handle up front in a relationship.
Yeah,
much better than at the back end.
Yeah, I think you could go into one of the first things that you do when you're trying to fix a problem like this.
Right.
Now, we're done scaring you.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going into fix-it mode.
Right.
So, what's the first baby step you can kind of think of?
Well, I would say if you go to our own website and you look at our terms, and it gets into how we work with our clients. And one of the things that we say is that as long as you paid for the work, you own the rights to them, all rights.
Right.
And so one of those things I would say is go grab that paragraph, use it in your own relationship with your agencies, your contractors, anyone that's working for you, and insist that as projects close, those assets are just being turned over to you in a very normal fashion. I think a formal agreement is really a good thing, like we do. I mean, our name is on that. That's why we really like working with legitimate businesses, if you will.
Yep.
Contractors that will just they'll work for you as long as you pay them. I mean, that's the good thing about contractors. And sometimes you'll want to bring in freelancers. You have to make sure that your freelancers are going to abide to those same principles. So
Right. It gets you out of
yeah.
a lot of potential sticky situations.
Yes.
Where, I mean, I think at the end of the day, a lot of business owners or a lot of people just want to work on the business.
Sure, just get it done.
Right. And they don't want to worry about the contract stuff.
Sure.
I am one of them. I hate that stuff.
Right.
However, it is very helpful because one, it just has that difficult conversation up front, making sure everyone knows, like,
Right.
I own this, you own that.
I
When does
agree.
it happen? That's very important to happen. And also, it sets up those expectations
Yes.
so that they know this is what it's going to be like. And then once that's done, no one cares anymore.
Sure.
Because you already had that difficult conversation. You just don't want to have it at the back end.
Yes.
Because that's when emotions get involved and
Yeah.
no one gets happy. It's best to just like, hey, this is how this is going to work.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you haven't done that already, or you have an agreement with, let's say, a contractor or an agency,
Right.
then perhaps you should spend just a little bit of time, go look at what you signed. And if it doesn't have anything there about who owns what and when, it might be a good idea to call up a quick 15-minute Zoom call with them.
Yeah.
Just to say, hey, I'm concerned about what would happen if we left. Not that I'm doing that right now. My coach, whatever you want to say, told me I really need to be doing this.
Right.
And have that conversation so that you don't have it when you actually really, 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 really need to.
Yeah. And for all the small business owners out there who don't like to get in the weeds with everything, one thing that I would mention to you is I think sometimes we get into a situation where we don't want to, lawyers are really expensive. And I get that.
Yeah.
But there's a thing called a letter agreement. You can go Google it. And I just write a simple letter to someone. And I can say, this is what we are asking you to do. And you have 2 lines of a signature, and you kind of work through this. It doesn't have to be sentences and paragraphs. It can just be some bullet points.
Yep.
And then you sign it. And it's really simple. It's not something that's overly formal, and it's just to document a conversation that you had. And no one's going to get upset about that, and it's just a simple step to take place that
Yeah, you can make a worksheet and
Yeah.
sign the worksheet, and that is legal.
Yeah, it's good.
And binding.
Yeah.
And you don't need to worry about an immense amount of the legalese.
Yeah. So that's a letter agreement. Very simple stuff.
I didn't know it was called a letter agreement.
Yeah.
I learned something new today.
Yeah.
Wow, look
Right.
at that.
And if there's a lawyer out there that there's a different, like really technical term, but that's what I was always taught.
Yeah,
was
reach
fine.
out to us
Yeah.
and let us know what the real technical term is so that we can make sure we're using the right one next
Right.
time.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, just some practical steps but that are like really easy to do. All right. So a lot of us use Google Drive
Yes.
to host files and to hold them, document, etc. Right.
Yes.
So there is a feature that not a lot of companies know about,
What's
and
that?
it's called a shared drive. Right. Not a shared folder, a shared drive. And it costs a little bit more per month to get access. We're talking like an extra $10 a month, basically. And what it does is when you can give anyone in the world, an agency, a contractor, your employees, etc., access to that company drive. What's really cool about this is that whenever anyone adds a file to it, it instantly swaps the ownership to be your company instead of them.
That's cool.
Yes, it is really, really
And
good.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's something that, I mean, we're starting to make more use of.
Yeah.
And so the reason why that's so good is because if you just use a regular shared folder, which is what almost everyone does, if you look in the columns, I think it's like the 3rd column of any file, it says owned
Owner.
by.
Yes.
Here's the problem. It's not owned by you. And so if you don't use shared drives, then
Right.
all of a sudden, oh, well, I have to go like copy this and change that. And there are ways that in Google Drive you can go and change the owner.
Right.
Here's the problem is that if any of your contractors use like their own domain, they have a business account, you can't do it. It only works if they come from a Gmail account.
Oh, see, I'm learning something new here. I want you to know
we're
that. I didn't
training
know that. Yeah.
Yeah, and
thanks.
so it is such a nice, quick little hack.
Right.
The other hack I would go and add, advice, not a hack, advice.
Tip.
Right, tip, stratagem. Yeah, the next stratagem for you, if you're having anyone do any type of programming for you, right? Something says your website, it could be a little application that's being developed. Do not let them get by without giving you access to like all of your code put into something like GitHub, right? For those of you who do not know, GitHub is essentially a repository where you can see all of the history of all the different edits that have been made to a specific piece of like code or program. And I'm drastically simplifying this.
Yes.
And what's really nice about it is that not only do you get the raw source files, which is very important, you also get to see the history of all the different changes, which the reason why that's like the next level of owning your content is that, for example, clients that have worked with us have their own GitHub repo that have all the code that we've done for them in it. And so if they bring on a programmer and that programmer is wondering why is it written this way, you generally can go back a few different versions to find out, oh, it's because they fixed that bug. I'm not going to touch it.
Yes.
Right? So it's like the ultimate source file.
And there's documentation, so I can have notes associated with
it.
Yeah.
Every single time you can edit, it's called a commit, and a commit has a message to it. And generally, if you're doing it right, it links back to like a pull request, all this kind of stuff, right? Yeah. That is too in the weeds for this
very
podcast
technical.
right now.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's probably not a lot of programmers listening to this.
Yeah.
However, if you're doing a project like that, insist you use something like GitHub. There are others like GitLab, Bitbucket. Those are all the same. It's just very good to make sure you own that.
Right.
It just does everything right for you the first time.
And just so you know, I'm a programmer by trade, so I am listening.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. Okay. See, nowadays, almost anyone can say they're a programmer because of ChatGPT.
Right, but I started with key punches. Right.
That's true. You did.
Where the drama was that you had a box of cards and you would fall and they would go all over the floor, right? And you, of course, didn't have these numbered, and so you had to start all over again. Anyway, another crazy story. But the thing that I was going to mention here is that what you've just described is actually in the advertising marketing world is known as a digital asset management system, a DAM.
Tell me more.
Right. So big agencies, big companies use digital asset management systems to manage all of these. So if I am Chrysler, if I'm Ford and I'm running advertising, my agency and my marketing department are working in taking all of this stuff in a similar thing you're talking about GitHub, but it's called a digital asset management system, and all of those assets are described very well in all of their shapes and forms, different sizes and so forth.
Oh, it's kind of like Google Drive, but on steroids.
Oh, yeah.
Because you put all your files in, you can add a description, you can have the version history of all of them. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So if you ever want to know about, if you're a big company, like big company, Fortune 500, and you're unfamiliar with this, I'm going to give you a name and save you a whole lot of time. It's by the name of Phil Spiegel. So Phil and I worked together back at another organization some time ago. This guy is like the master of digital asset management systems. You can look him up on Google, on LinkedIn. He's a master, right? Phil Spiegel. So anyway, if you want to know about digital asset management systems.
Isn't there anything like that exists for smaller businesses?
I would say there's probably smaller versions of these things. And again, we didn't really spend much time on it, but Google Drive really satisfies
most of it.
For a small business. That's kind of all you want to know.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, these are expensive. Yeah, expensive systems. And Adobe has a whole system of all this kind of stuff.
No. You lost my interest right there.
Exactly.
I have a very strained relationship with Adobe.
I know you do.
I could share maybe at some point.
Right, yes.
I will never forgive them for what they did for Flash.
Yes.
I will never. See, it's coming out already, and I said I wasn't going to talk about it. I hate that company.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, Flash did have a possibility at one time.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Are you asking me to tell the 5 minutes, 20-minute story? Anyways, we're going to close up that hard knock with the last thing that you can do.
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, once you've started to take steps, do this. Do not start with this. It is a huge job. All right. It's called data governance. All right.
Yes.
Policy management. Okay. It is essentially writing down like a policy for how we actually handle everything. It is identifying literally every single piece of asset in your company in every single department, from operations to your financials to marketing to sales, your equipment, everything, documenting like all of this stuff. Who owns what, where it is, who created it, right? And making sure you have someone in your company who champions it.
Right.
That their job is to all the time make sure that all this data is going where it needs, is being named like it should, it's being owned. They're the ones reaching out to your agencies to say, by the way, you gave us this file. I don't see the associated Photoshop file. Please give that to me and put it in our Google Drive, right? Huge effort.
Yes.
Now, I think we've made it clear it's very much worth that effort. However, let's set ourselves up for success and start with the smaller one, which is get yourself a nice Google Share Drive.
Yes.
Right? Have that agreement, that conversation with your partners, your agencies about who owns what, and just start to move in that direction.
Yeah.
Then move over towards like data governance and all this other different type of stuff.
Yeah.
There are firms who can help you do that.
Yeah.
You don't have to take on that journey alone, but it's something you should think about in your time horizon, because if you don't own all that content, I mean, man, especially in the age of everyone wanting to use AI, again, I hate that term, but the less you have of your data and your ownership, the less you can actually be flexible and use it however you want.
Right. Probably I'll be a straight man for the next section.
Sure.
But I was at one of our prospects, let's say, a couple of weeks ago. Really amazing organization.
Yeah.
And I think how I would categorize their attitude is they look at every piece of their business as part of the formula for their success.
Interesting. Okay.
And so everything that they see in their organization, they see as proprietary, and they see it as something that they're going to protect. And so they want to understand the formula for how that actually got created, whether it's marketing or it's a formula for the products that they make, or the systems for selling. And I can't say they're crazy, like over the top, but I think that attitude at a heart, you can tell that they really want to understand how things actually are made. And this gets into the marketing assets and, all the assets of the business.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of bringing it right over to our next hard knock.
That's what I said. I think it's a good straight man for you.
It's a great segue.
Yeah.
Right? Which is our next hard knock, to make it easier for me who edits this.
Yes.
Right? I got to make a clear delineation so I can make that cut, do all the editing, and then make little segments that go out everywhere. This is for me, not for you guys. This is for me. All right?
Yeah.
The next hard knock is being lazy and not knowing how key functions of your job work. I want to throw this one over to you to go tell a little story about what we actually mean by this.
Yeah. The story I will tell is when I was at Tell Labs. So this is a, my own personal story. So I started there
So hold on. What is Tell Labs?
Oh, okay. So Tell Labs was in the data communications and telecommunications world.
Okay.
Back when. And they had a series of products that were sold to the telephone companies that were providing, at that time, very early on, internet services, all sorts of telephony, data communications. This is back in the days of modems, if you can look that up in Google or in Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And so they had all sorts of really terrific products, and they were mainly selling those to the telephone companies back in the day. That's who was providing those kind of services. And I started there as a product manager. Now, I came out of sales. My degree was in engineering, computer science. But it looked like an interesting job. And so I took that on. And there was never one time that I sat with the engineering team or the tech support team to actually understand how the products worked. And so I would sit in our meetings, and I really didn't understand all that they were saying, and I never took the time to actually learn about them, and I should have, right? And so I became, an interesting person in the business, and I kind of understood the business aspects about how things worked, but I didn't understand how the products actually worked and how they fed and what my job was, because a lot of my job was to advocate for the customers and understand their problems and be able to bring those to engineering so that they could get done. But because I really didn't understand all that I should have about the product, I really wasn't a very good product manager, to tell you the truth. Yeah, so that's my lazy story, and I should have done that. Yeah.
I mean, that reminds me of, there is a veterinary clinic here in Denver I am quite knowledgeable about.
Right.
And they were a roll-up from a lot of other clinics.
Yeah.
Right? A PE firm basically went around acquiring
Bought a bunch of
everything.
them. You see this happen all the time.
Oh, it happens all the time. And it's not
Right.
like a bad thing. I mean, I mean, that's what they do.
Right.
Right. And so what ended up happening was over the years, the actual team of, the vets, all of the nurses, the criticalists, all these people who are doing the job. They are
Right.
the feet on the ground helping animals like live and basically, I mean, to a lot of them being like therapists for
Sure.
the
For the owners.
for the owners.
Right, exactly.
They really are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what was really unfortunate is that all of these employees saw needs for, okay, we need this new type of scanning unit. We need this. We need support in this different area. And you know what? In the 3-4 years that has been going on since the PE firm wrapped all these together, they've never given them any of it because they thought it was useless. It wasn't a good use of time.
Understand.
They kept saying, hey, it's going to happen. It has still never happened. They have never gotten the new machines they needed.
Right.
When they were looking for a new location, they found one, and then lo and behold, it turns out the location they were purchasing is way too small for what they needed.
Right.
Right? And the whole reason for this is that there is not a single person on the management team of that PE company who has ever been a doctor. They have never been a vet. They have never been a criticalist. They have never been someone who has walked on the floor to see what it is actually like a day in the life of the people servicing your customers.
Right. Yeah, this happens a lot. I think it's not like we're saying anybody that's managing the numbers of the business has to go out and actually be on the field, if you will. But you have to develop some kind of appreciation.
Right.
Right.
You
and
have to understand.
empathy. Hello, empathy. And if you don't have that and you're just trying to push some numbers around and make something happen, you really end up making some very poor decisions.
Oh.
Inevitably, you're going to make a really, really dumb decision.
Absolutely. And this is a mistake I have made myself.
Yes.
Where I was doing work in specific areas of, marketing, and I had no idea. I mean, this was probably 5-6 years ago.
Sure.
I'm doing advertising work for one of our clients, and I didn't take the time to go and learn, oh, wait, how does that actually get delivered to the customer?
Yeah.
And so you end up advertising for something that no one wants. And then the sales team comes back to you in 6 to 12 months saying these are all garbage because I didn't take the time to go learn what isn't I'm actually doing.
Right.
Right. And the reason I'm saying that is you might be hearing what we're saying and thinking, oh man, I would never do that as a PE firm. I would absolutely go look at what they're doing. Well, let's run through a list just as an example for exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
So that you can see that you are probably making this mistake in some regard because we all love to be lazy. And it takes a very special person to be so on top of it that they're not making any of these mistakes.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
So, for example,
Yeah. Go take the first one.
I'll take the first one. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're in operations, right, the day-to-day and making sure that the boots are getting on the ground in the right place where the equipment needs to be, right? You're handling all of that. Well, are you ever going on the job site? Have you ever thought about how often, you should be, if you are doing, say, for example, maybe you are give me an example of a service business.
I don't know, carpet cleaning.
Sure, carpet cleaning, right? How often are you stopping by to watch how the team's doing the job, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're not, how do you know if maybe they don't have the right equipment that they really ought to be? Could be saving you a lot of money. Or how long and all the different hiccups they're getting into because you didn't schedule things perfectly.
Yeah.
Right? You would never know, and it requires you to be there.
Yeah.
Even though that's not technically your job, it's certainly related to it.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing is that a couple of episodes ago, we talked about how as a business grows, you start getting farther and farther away.
Company customer gap.
Yeah, so that's Luke W. Customer gap. And at some point, you start hiring people into these inside roles who don't really have an interest, if you will, kind of my issue. Didn't have an interest in learning how it's delivered at the last mile.
Yeah.
And so I think the owners of these business, they used to do all that stuff. They used to do the carpet cleaning, right?
Yeah.
But now they've got employees maybe a couple of times removed, and they haven't actually done that.
Which, by the way, this is generally why services and products get degraded in quality over time
Yes.
because the people making them don't talk to the people selling them, who don't talk to the, etc.
Right. Well, how many times have you heard someone say, I wonder if the engineers who designed this product actually use it?
Exactly. The answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the real answer. Why don't you take another one?
Yeah. So we talked about running a sales team.
Yeah.
And not understanding all of the processes that your sales team has to go through in order to take something from prospect all the way to customer.
Because there might be multiple teams involved.
There could be.
Right. And initial qualification to, at the end, the proposal and handed it off completely to operations.
Yes. Right. And all of those things have to work together, right? And the more that you understand how that actually works, I believe you can, one, advocate not only for your own sales team, but advocate for the other components of the business. It could be operations, it could be marketing, it could be finance, it could be the HR team doing the recruiting, right? All of those things. The more closer you are to the customer, I think that's our main thing here, is the customer centricity is so important in understanding how that actually gets delivered that everybody needs to have that kind of role.
Yeah. Got another one here.
Yep.
You're running advertising, right? Especially with Google and Facebook. Well, how often are you taking the time to learn, well, how exactly is Google making the decisions of where my ad should show up? How is Facebook's algorithm probably working? There's all this generative AI being used right now with Google's responsive search ads, right? Well, when was the last time you did some research on YouTube for 30 minutes to find out how that kind of a system works? Right? Because if you don't know how it works, how could you possibly ever use it to its fullest potential, first of all, but also when something goes wrong, know how to fix it?
Yeah.
Most people don't. In fact, most advertisers I've talked to have no idea about the technicalities about how all this stuff is working.
Yeah.
Which is that's what separates the like 0.1% amazing people. They're all nerds,
Right.
who love learning about that stuff, and the people who are just kind of run the mill, they're just like, click the button, I'm done.
Yeah.
Right? But it matters.
Does this kind of get into, like when we were talking with Durendal last week?
Durandal.
I'm sorry.
Famous sword.
Thank you.
Fantasy sword. Will destroy it. Yeah. Very important to get the phrasing right.
Thank you.
Durandal.
Okay, right. Durandal. When we were asking about keywords, right, and they couldn't answer us what the keywords were because they didn't understand how their own process worked.
Oh, right. So we're talking about Durandal, who is getting purchased.
Yes.
And we're assisting a little bit in that. And when I asked the question, okay, what keywords have worked best?
Yes.
And their team didn't really know.
Didn't know.
They should definitely, hopefully most advertisers do. But yes, you should know, what good keywords are, which by the way would mean as an advertiser, you might want to go and talk to the sales team, because they would know the lingo that the customers are using, which is maybe very different than what Google's telling you, etc.
Yeah, but I'm actually coming at from almost the 180 from that, is that sometimes your customers are searching using terms that your sales team aren't familiar with.
Oh, right, and you should be informing them.
And so there's this 360 that needs to go on.
Right, so your sales team should be talking to the advertising team.
But if the advertising team doesn't know what the keywords are, then you've obviously lost half the battle right
Exactly.
there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good communication, I think, is the basic thing here.
Yeah, I think the maybe like one last one is if you're like the owner, founder, high up ranking, like the CEO of a company, right? Well, do you understand at a very high level, at least all of the main functions of your business? Right? Do you know kind of how sales works in terms of how the pitch gets made? Do you understand how marketing is and operations and the hiccups they're kind of having? Right? And really spending time learning about each one. Because the thing is, when push comes to shove, you're going to have to make a decision at some point about which one you need to emphasize.
Right.
Because you can't upgrade everything. That doesn't work out well. Right? It's generally kind of piecemeal. And if you don't know, you might make the incredibly wrong decision.
Yeah.
So I think that's enough examples.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
And I think we've gone into some of the things that happen if you don't make sure that you as an individual and as a company, that your employees understand what the key functions of their job or your job are.
Yeah.
But for example, one of the ones that we didn't touch on quite yet is you tend to, if you don't take advantage of the opportunity you have to learn about anything kind of slightly adjacent to what you work on, you tend to minimize the value that those different jobs or services or techniques provide.
Yeah.
And you can think a little bit lesser of them. This almost gets into that Edward Tufte speech I gave on last episode. And like I was saying just previously, you end up, not optimizing correctly. And you miss huge, big wins you could have had because you end up falling prey to your own intuition, right? You make judgments based off of only what I know. And you don't think about, oh, well, like that customer company gap we were talking about. If I'm only here and I'm making all my decisions based off of this, and I'm never hearing about this or researching and learning about this, you're only seeing a small part of that customer journey. You're not trying to include everything else. And you don't have to learn about everything.
Right.
That's impossible. But just enough on the outer edges.
Yep.
Because in theory, if I'm here and I'm learning about this, well, then these people here will learn about this. And so you end up if you have that kind of a culture in your company where everyone knows just a little bit outside of what they do, well, you kind of add a lot of fault tolerance.
That's true.
Because if your people in sales know like a little bit about the advertising going on, and your advertising team knows a little bit about the sales that are going on, to come back to your example, if your advertising team up and implodes, I don't know, a huge earthquake happens and California splits from the United States, and now they're not working with you anymore, the advertising agency.
Right.
All right, what everyone's is like, oh, it's going to happen someday.
Yeah, right.
Well, while you might not have everything, right? Well, your sales team would at least know what seemed to work well, and they can help you piece that back together again.
Right.
So not only are they
agree.
selling better because they're getting information on all angles, but they can also help you out of sticky situation. And the same is for everything from like operations to your financials to everyone.
Yeah. I feel like some of this just in general goes to there's a process and multiple processes in your business, and you need to understand the inputs and the outputs.
Yeah.
And it also, there's a responsibility to all of us, I think, to watch out for our brethren. So the people that are handing us information and the ones that we're handing off to, it really requires more empathy and enjoyment. I think that's the whole thing about working with people that you really enjoy working with, because you end up starting to look out for them, right? I think about this one salesperson, Tom. Tom's wonderful and one of our clients. And he's the kind of individual that gives us feedback. Hello, right from the field. So when he hears something from the customer about anything related to marketing, I'm getting an email. And it's not always positive, but it's feedback that I otherwise don't have access to.
Right. He's taking it to the next level of not only trying to learn what's outside of himself,
Yes,
but realizing the people who need his input to learn about that,
Right.
one step outside of what they do. And he's like, okay, well, they need this.
Yes.
Right. That's like next level.
That is next level. But if you're in marketing, it's really difficult to have a conversation with the customers because there's sort of
You're the marketing guy.
Yeah, the marketing guy, and so sales team doesn't always like bring the marketing people into a meeting, right? It's rare, so you have to find other ways of getting that kind of information from the field, and having an advocate like Tom, huge.
Oh, very huge.
Yeah.
So let's spend a little bit of time talking about how you fix this problem or make sure it never happens in the first place.
Right. Yeah.
And to me, a really great first step is like baby steps, right? Baby steps super important, right? Should celebrate them. They're not just small. This is a nice important victory. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Is start by identifying for yourself, and if you're in the position of like, say you're a VP sales, start to do it for some of your other employees underneath you, right? That you're helping to manage, is that identify what parts of the business, what types of techniques, right? So this is a mixture of, oh, hey, I'm in sales, so maybe something in marketing or advertising here. But if you're an advertiser, it might also include like, oh, I need to know more knowledge about generative AI probably right now.
Yes.
Right? It's both. make a note of those that are like one removed from you. Just one, not to the other ends of the planet, right?
Yeah.
So if you're in marketing, learning about stuff in operations would absolutely be very helpful to you, but
Yeah.
that's probably more like 2 times removed. So don't worry about that. Just think about, okay, well, if I am, let's say, a designer in the company, okay, well, the two things that come to my mind are, one, well, I better understand what the advertisers are doing because
Yes.
I'm directly related to them. So
Yes.
probably that bucket. And then also I'd like to make sure I know how sales actually sells because they're actually learning about customers.
Yeah.
And there are probably, I mean, more ideas are coming in my head of all the different little parts that I kind of touch just barely.
Right.
Or I might even deliver my content to.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that's probably an even easier way of thinking about it. Whoever you deliver your work to directly is someone that you should learn and know pretty well about what they do, how they do it, and the hiccups they run into.
Yeah.
Because you have the ability to impact their success, and their success also helps you do your job even better and better and better and better.
Right.
Because the best insights never come from you themselves. It's that intersection of when two different people are like,
Yeah.
I'm hearing A, you're hearing B. Oh, it's actually A plus B.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Right. And
Yeah.
I think that's the kind of relationship that we're all after. But it does require a little bit of humility in order to pull that off.
Oh, well, you got to
Right.
give up. I mean, if you spent an hour a week, that would be amazing. But I mean, it's generally not something you at first look forward to. I do now, but you're going to definitely be thinking, oh, what's the value about that Joe guy going to give me,
Sure.
etc. But if you
Right.
get over that,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
Huge.
So, what would you say is some really good? Now that you've kind of defined some of the areas that you really ought to be spending time learning, coaching, etc.
Right.
What's probably a next good step?
Well, I think, again, in my history, I think about my first job out of college was at Intel. And there wasn't any training program back then. And I would say that most of our listeners probably don't have a formal training program for people in their business. So, kind of crazy, but Intel took all of these newly hired salespeople, all 18 of us, and we got into tech support. So we were responsible for answering the phone and taking questions from our customers, of which products we've never had any knowledge of whatsoever. I mean, we had a little training in headquarters, but other than that, we didn't really understand this full, catalog full of components and so forth. And yet, inside of a few months, we all got pretty conversational with all of our products because our customers asked us questions and we didn't know the answer. We had to go find the answer, either from our local engineers or from our headquarters. And eventually, we got pretty sharp, which made us darn good salespeople, right? And we also understood who to call in the factory to get things done. And, we really became all well-rounded. And I think that was probably an accident more than anything. And honestly, I don't think they knew what to do with us. But, for 2 years, that was our role, was doing tech support. And I'd have to say that was some of the best time of learning. There wasn't any particular expectation that, I'm going to solve the world's problems and so forth. And I think every business can afford at least a few weeks of putting some of your new employees, whatever their role is,
Yeah.
put them in front of the customers. Put them in front of your suppliers. Let them understand the business. Let them figure out problems, right?
Yeah.
Let them take phone calls, answer emails.
You're reminding me of a company named Wormwood, who, by the way, maker of this table.
Oh, yeah,
This
this table.
modular game. By the way,
Right.
I love this table.
Yeah.
Around the edges of it, it is a magnetic rail.
Yeah.
So for those of you who have video, if you don't, sorry,
Yeah.
go to the YouTube just for this one time.
Yeah.
You got like these cup holders. And
Yeah.
I don't have to have it on the table.
Which
I
are
can
solid
just-
wood, by the
Yeah,
way.
solid wood, and you
Yeah.
just like snap it in there on the side. That
Yeah.
was really loud. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna have fun editing that one out. But it's great. Gets your stuff off the table. Anyways,
It's awesome.
So Wormwood, their big thing is they said, hey, I want to really make sure that everyone understands the time and the effort that goes into all of the craftsmanship because they want to deliver high quality wood products to everyone.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? Well, a few months ago, they instantiated that every single person in the company, from if you're like one of the lawyers, if you do design work, if you are just one of the truck drivers, to you run HR. And by the way, same for all the C-level execs in the entire company. No one is exempt. Once, I think, every week or two, you have to work a shift on the floor.
Yep.
So you are running a planer, you're running the cutter, you're running the glue jointer, right? All these different tools, and you're getting rotated around. So over time, like you've spent some time on every single tool on that shop floor.
Yeah.
And I believe what is so cool about that is if that's what your brand is about, if that's what your message is, talk about a great way of squeezing together that company customer gap.
Right.
Because now I understand how important that message really is. Like, wow, we could be doing this the cheap way, but because we're doing this the hard way, like, this is difficult.
Yeah.
And it becomes, if you're a designer, man, tons of ideas come up. If you are in HR, what better way to service your employees but know all the pains and struggles they have? So you actually put good policies in place.
Yeah.
Right? And it's incredible. I mean, like if you're a flooring company, like, for residential or whatever, like we were talking about that operational.
Yeah.
Well, just learning and seeing the struggles of what your own employees are doing won't just help you make better decisions of who needs to go on the job and what and how to schedule it.
Right.
But also the pains the customer might have.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about, I've shared before, I ran sales and marketing for US Robotics back when it was a very, very small company. I worked for the owner, Casey Cowell, and Casey had a really interesting process, and that was that the engineering staff, which was all of maybe 6 engineers at the time, this is a company, by the way, that was sold for like $3 billion. So when I was there, very, very small company, I was employee 72. And every one of the engineers had a requirement to sit on the tech support line, telephone line. I think it was like a half day, maybe a full day, once a week or once a month or something like that. And, you'd hear these conversations like, oh, it's not supposed to operate that way. Hold on a moment. And it gave them ideas for new product ideas, for fixes that had to be done in the field.
Yeah.
It really made the products much better. And then they went one better, and that is when we went to trade shows, guess who worked the staff, worked the booth? Not just some salespeople. The entire engineering team worked the booth. Take them out of engineering and put them in front of customers. Now, the customers didn't know that those were engineers they were talking to.
Yeah, they probably found out pretty fast.
Yeah, but wow. I mean, our presence in a trade show was amazing because we had these super, super smart people talking to customers and wowing them, but at the same time getting really great customer feedback. So it was huge.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like the really great, I'd say this is more like an adult step, not a baby step, but not quite like driving a car across country step.
Yeah.
All right. I think that worked.
Okay, right.
Somewhat. Okay, sure. We'll say that worked out well.
Yeah.
Is imagine what would happen if all companies took a little bit after what doctors have to do, which is every single year or every couple years, you have to go to X amount of like conferences, basically.
Yeah, continuing education.
To learn.
Right.
Exactly. Now, that's not always super effective, and they manipulate that as much as they can, just turn into like vacation days.
Right.
Yes, I know a few. Like, hey, smart on you if it's flexible, by all means, you know. But imagine if a company had taken time to do that first step we talked about, which is identify who kind of who touches each other.
Yeah.
Right? Who is like one step removed, and almost had like a map made, like a little mind map, right? On an Excel spreadsheet. Well, imagine if once a year, once every couple years, you had the requirement of, hey, you need to go to a conference on X. Pay them for the off time. By the way, they'll make that up completely just from what they'd learn. Right? Or maybe you have those groups go together and do something. Or maybe you, once a quarter, there's a meeting with a very good structure, because otherwise they will waste all the time talking about nothing to do with what they're doing. Right? But actually put it in place that a huge part of the success of our company is that we really care about this stuff.
Yes.
That would be amazing. I mean, imagine you're a sales guy. You go into a company, and every quarter you have to go and write a new advertisement for the marketing team. Wow. Do you know how amazing that would be?
Right.
You would learn so much, and the marketing team would tear everything you wrote to shreds.
That's probably true.
Because they'd say, you have
Yeah.
no idea what you're doing, but
Yeah.
that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
And have the marketing team go out and make a sale.
Yeah.
Go have them go. If you got an internal marketing team, an agency might be a little bit harder to do.
Sure.
Right? I mean, I actually would love being taken for a drive along once. That actually be great for our clients.
Yeah.
You should offer it because they might say yes, right? But
Yeah.
imagine you have your marketing team go for a drive along, watch. They don't even have to make the sale. Just watch how it's being done.
Mm-hmm.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
You would make the absolute best possible material in the human planet.
Well, you can do a one-off, and the one-off is taking them all to a trade show and have them work the show.
Yes. That
Right.
would be the smaller version of the adult step.
Yeah.
The teenager step.
And that's an easy one. And I don't mean taking your marketing team to the show so they can set up the booth and break down the booth.
Yeah.
I'm talking about making sure they are comfortable talking to customers just
Yeah.
as if they were a salesperson or an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. And I've done all that. It really, really is cool. It works.
Well, you asked me that whole question a few episodes ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's how I learned a lot of what I know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You just have to get out there and do it.
Yep. Well, hey, I think we're going to move into our last segment, which is, as we all know, I asked John a question, he asked me a question, no holds barred. It could have nothing to do with sales and marketing. It generally does. Or it could have nothing to do with this episode.
Okay.
So the first question that came to my mind is when you were working at Intel and they required you to basically go through a whole training regimen of,
Right.
do all these different tasks, which aren't really your job, but it's related to, right? What was probably the biggest and most important thing you learned that when you went and did the job they specifically hired you to do, you were like, wow, that was really insightful?
Okay. A couple things come to mind. One of which is how creative you can actually be in sales. And, I'm thinking of a gentleman that I worked with, John Doerr. If you're ever familiar with John Doerr, he's one of the most preeminent venture capitalists in the world. He actually was my office mate when I started at Intel. I feel like I'm sort of a Forrest Gump. I sort of in the right place at the right time. And this is a guy who really could just make stuff up. And I remember one time I was in that training program very early on. I was in our offices in Hillsboro, Oregon, and I was being trained in some of our high-end systems. Now, John worked in the Chicago office, which is where I was, and I was in training in Oregon. And just so you know, just so you don't know your geography, those are not like next door. Okay,
No, they're
you
very
actually
far
have
away.
to hop on an
Here,
airplane.
we'll do, it'd be this way for me, so for the camera, it's this.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Right,
Yeah.
right. It's one of those, 60s movies, little map kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so here's John Doerr rifling through the file cabinets in Oregon. I look up and here he is, right? And the reason for that is that he was not satisfied with the answer that one of the tech support engineers gave us in Hillsboro. It wasn't me, thankfully. And so he just went to the O'Hare Airport, hopped on a plane, flew to the Portland airport, and came out to our facility and walked in and just started going through the files to find out his own answer. Okay?
That's perfect.
Right?
Oh, I love
And this is
that.
a guy who just gets stuff done. Okay?
Yeah.
And I think as I
He has
look...
a lot of figure outedness.
Yes, exactly, as we learned today.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember that so well, and that it was actually applauded that he took that kind of action to solve a customer's problem, and he didn't accept no, so he just took it in his own hands. Later, I had an opportunity literally placed in front of me, is that one of my clients that I've been working on for quite a while, we came to a point where they said, okay, we're ready to switch from the Motorola technology that was our big competitor back then, and we'll switch to the Intel technology. Great. We have a problem. We have invested in all of the development, hundreds of thousands of dollars of development equipment around Motorola, and, sunk cost, like you talked about vendor lock in the earlier episode, similar kind of thing here, right?
Yeah.
And so I thought, okay, how can we solve this problem? How can I take this into my own hands? And I said, how about if I buy that back from you and trade even and give you the system that you need from us? And he said, can you do that? And I said, I'm going to find out.
Nice.
And so I had contacts back in our offices back in Santa Clara, California. And I said, hey, I've got an opportunity for us to get all of the vendor equipment from our competitor, development equipment, and you can have all the licenses, and we can actually,
Yeah.
literally reverse engineer what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah.
And that was like done, right?
Yeah, that was some clever thinking.
And that was huge thinking. And I don't think I would have done that if I didn't know that there were some rules, but then you could break the rules and it was okay
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
So I love that.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Sick.
So now it's my turn.
It's your turn. There was that awkward silence. You're never supposed to have silence on a show like this. And I'm not going to edit that out so that if you don't like that silence, you can complain to John.
So,
Snappy. You got to go fast.
Yeah, I haven't thought of one.
Snappy. Well, we talked about the 2 hard knocks. Maybe that'll like make you think of a couple different things, right? We got the being lazy, not learning how key functions of your job work.
Right.
And we got not owning your marketing assets. Those were 2 of the key things that we were talking about.
All right. So we talked about all of these different aspects of getting involved, going to the street level, talking to customers.
Sure, yeah.
Right. All of that kind of thing. I hear from my contemporaries that this young generation, your generation, actually doesn't enjoy getting out to see people. It started from people that, like one of the conversations I had just last week is, why is it that younger kids just don't want to get their driver's license anymore?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. And they spend so much time on video games, right?
Okay. Sure.
And
Yeah.
all these kind of things. And I'm wondering, one, do you actually believe that? And secondly, what do you think that it prevents people that are of your age, maybe a little bit younger, from wanting to get involved and asking those tough questions and getting in front of customers and possibly embarrassing themselves? And is that something that you think is unique to your generation, or if that's something that is always been happening and for some reason we're just focused on it now?
Yeah. So it's definitely something unique to my generation and younger.
Okay.
And that's because it's way easier to not have to do it anymore. That's why. You don't have to go see someone anymore. You can do it all online. You got a phone. There are multiple ways to distance yourself from any uncomfortability. You don't, why would you do it if you don't have to do it? Exactly.
Right.
There's no reason to. And I think a lot of this also ties back to, we're part of the generation. I'm part of the generation, rather, where everyone's a winner. Everyone wins.
Every guy's a trophy.
Yeah, everyone gets a trophy. And I think a lot of that for people, when you instill that type of a feeling in them, is, well, why would I ever want to go out of my way? Who cares? I'm going to do the minimum I need to do, and then I'm done.
Right. Well, it's natural to do the minimum.
Well, sure, but you're talking about specifically going out and seeing people. I think
Yeah.
most people don't want to go out and see people until they see what it's actually like.
Okay.
But you only find that out once you forced yourself to do it, and in this generation, it's very easy to not have to do that. You can get everything you need and never have to leave your house. Back in the day, you could not get everything you need and not have to leave your house. You have to. And so you have to experience that. You have to figure out and find out what it's like to trip and fall. And you don't have to do that anymore. You can get by very easily and not trip and fall. Now, your life is generally going to be a lot less fulfilling because you're not going to have all those experiences. And when you do have to do it, you're going to fall flat on your face and injure yourself.
Right.
But instead of just having a scrape, because you're learning like 15 hard knocks at a time instead of one. So that's why. And if you want a lot of context behind it, Simon Sinek has done an entire series on YouTube about this exact same thing. Yeah, that's why.
I didn't know this, folks. So that's huge.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
hey, there you go.
No, that's fascinating. So what's the fix for that?
What's the fix for that?
Yeah.
Boy.
Because if I get a job and I'm told I can just be a programmer, I can sit at home all day.
Are you saying a fix for like how you fix it yourself if you're that person, or how a company would change the culture to basically fix
we're
it?
focused on corporations, companies. So how do they do that? How do I make that? I take that little bit of embarrassment or possibility embarrassment out of the equation and make them feel comfortable being in front of people that
Well,
may
I
judge
think
them in some ways.
I think that I mean that gets to be a very touchy topic because a lot of people don't want to, and there's not really a great reason why they have to.
Oh.
I mean, if you're a programmer, why do you need to? Right? Well, you don't. It would benefit you probably in the long run because you'd actually go get to talk to the customers you're writing the code for. But convincing someone that's valuable can be a very big uphill battle.
Wow.
Right? They'll just say, "Oh, hey, I'll just go get someone else to tell me the feedback." Right? Happens all the time. How you go do it? I'd probably start by showing them the value before putting anything in place. That's what I'd probably do. Now, I don't have any ideas off the top of my head how you would show the value, but just like with anything, you are selling them on doing something, and how do you sell perfectly?
Yeah.
You show them you have a problem and I can fix it. So until you can identify the problem and show them that fixing it is worth multiple dividends, you will never fix it because they have to want it.
Yeah.
So I don't have a clear answer for you, but that is the thought process you'd have to have. You can't shove something down someone's throat. They'll throw it up on purpose or they'll leave.
Yeah.
And you don't want that. So you have to find and engineer ways that they intrinsically understand the value and crave it.
Wow. Okay. That's super helpful for people in my generation that are working with your generation and figuring out how to actually make that interesting.
Well, I mean, there's also
Right.
just a big difference in your generation. There was such a huge thing of there's pride in your work, right? You're doing work for the company. And in my generation and younger, it is very much the company. All companies are evil. There's no pride in my work. I'm literally just working to live and then doing my other thing. And that's also a big part of it.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to be the top of the mountain. No one wants to be at the bottom. But the thing is that everyone has to work at the bottom, and there's only a few people who get to the top. And that's not a bad thing.
Right.
Everyone, and because everyone's taught you're a winner, everyone's taught, oh, you're number one, and so that's a really big problem. Yeah, huge problem.
Wow.
Yeah, in fact, it's generally very freeing when you realize you aren't the number one because you're probably number one in something different. Like programming for me, I'm good at it. I used to think I was like, man, I could be like way up there, and then I met a couple friends who are like insanely better than me in anything I could ever hope to do in programming. So I'm like, well, I'm not going to make that my number one thing anymore.
Yeah,
I can do it. I can direct
Right.
it. It's great,
Right.
but I am not that person.
Yeah.
And you know, that's helpful.
That's really helpful insight. I hope that's helpful to everyone that's watching this and listening.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super helpful.
Well, he broke the rule that I said of we haven't had anything not sales and marketing related yet. So there you go. Right off the bat.
Yeah.
Took it as a challenge.
It was good.
Yeah.
Thanks for your honesty.
Absolutely. But hey, that is the end of this episode of Hard Knocks. I think maybe once we get some more questions in from the audience, maybe we'll open it up to them.
I think that'd be great.
And
Yeah,
we'll
absolutely.
add maybe an extra segment where we ask or answer one or two questions from the audience.
Yes.
So we'll start bundling those up.
Okay.
And maybe start answering some of those because I would love to hear from all of you listening what parts you'd like to have a little bit more information on. If there's something maybe specific to your business you want our insight on, completely for free, no charge at all.
Right.
You know?
Right. Exactly.
Let us know, right? Because we want to reduce that company customer gap too,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So
That's great, David.
that is it for this session, everyone. Stay curious.